He looks for anyone who will turn him loose.
Speak the truth, even if they crucify me. Bring my soul, even if they chain my body. Look the goal, ain't nowhere to go. Beware those prophets that touch a leg before they touch a soul.
Nothing will make sense to your American youth.
Any gotta let me go. Any gotta let me go.
But in the end,
You will understand.
Welcome to Editors on Editing. I'm Glen Garland. When I last spoke to Joe Walker, he had been nominated for the Eddie, the BAFTA, and the Oscar for 12 Years a Slave. This year he has crafted the extraordinary film, Sicario. I love the film.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here. I just thought it was brilliantly paced, and I really felt like I was with Kate going down this black hole.
Well, that's his job done.
How did you become involved with the film?
I'd seen Incendie, which is an absolutely stupendous film. Not that many people in the States have seen it. It's a really, it's a highly recommended. That's a Denis breakout film. And I was very taken by that. And then around the time of the Oscars, around the time of 12 Years, I was watching Prisoners with my daughter, who was 17 at the time.
Yeah.
And we just, our hearts were pounding out of our chests at the end of it. The one thing I really wanted with Sicario was for people to have the same reaction I did on Prisoners, which was to say, God, that was tense, And so I'm kind of pleased that seems
Well, the atmosphere is really palpable, and how you guys created this feeling of just dread and intensity is just brilliant. I love how when you open up the film, it's very quiet, and and things are very drawn out, and then wham, we crash through the wall. Tell me about creating the opening.
The opening was a completely different opening originally. I mean, there wasn't a lot spare. There wasn't a lot on the. Roger Deakins and Denis Villeneuve, they sort of meticulous planners, and the budget was not so great that they had the luxury of shooting a lot of stuff they weren't going to use. But there was a sequence which was like a standalone sequence with Benicio. We jettisoned that rather, painfully in the cut. It was a really, really good scene. I mean, basically, he's a guy standing, waist deep in the water, and you discover that he's actually drowning somebody. He's interrogating somebody, and then he goes too far and kills them, and then drags their body back to the shore, brings them back to life, and then carries on interviewing them. So it's quite an introduction to Benicio's character. But the film to me is very carefully balanced viewpoints. I mean, for the main plank of it, it's Kate, and then you flip into Benicio's point of view and you go on a killing spree. And with Kate, interestingly, and there is perhaps a parallel with 12 Years in a way, in that our main characters are both passive in some way. Things happen to them.
Yes.
And, that's a very delicate thing in the edit. You have to kind of balance because people can get frustrated.
But in both films, I feel like even though the characters are passive, they're trying to be active, and they're being thwarted.
Not authorized to follow orders from Alejandro, especially in Mexico.
Fine, then stay here. But you don't want to, do you?
I just want to know what I'm getting into.
Yeah, she's on the back foot all the time. But she's feisty, and she's, we take the opportunities to definitely show her anger and her frustration, her rage.
Like, Kate is constantly trying to figure out what is her position in here. And I think it's not until like 95 minutes in to the film that she figures out, oh, this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
And as an audience, you feel like you have that same sort of frustration, like, I want to know why I'm here, what's going on. And it's so wonderful that you're able to pull that mystery and just really stretch it.
That's exactly the aim. And, she's playing catch up and we're playing catch up. And that's exactly the reason why, for example, dumping Benicio's scene at the beginning means that you are just invested with her. And you're looking at all these dodgy characters with the flip-flops and things through her eyes. And, you discover Alejandro at the same time as her. It's very important to kind of be in step with Kate, but never for her to be behind you. That's the very key thing. Because as soon as she's behind you, then she's frustrated.
Sure. Dropping that scene at the beginning, I think, was definitely the right way to go, because he's so mysterious, and you don't know what he's capable of.
So this is your specialty? The cartels in Mexico are your specialty.
Yeah.
Is there anything I should know?
You're asking me how watch works. For now, let's just keep an eye on the time.
And so slowly you start realizing that he's capable of unspeakable things.
Yeah.
But if you had that at the beginning, you'd go, oh, okay, I know.
Exactly. And with those actors in particular, that's, one of the great joys of cutting that film was the kind of eyeballing they give each other, the sort of intense look. I mean, they are Wimbledon championship eyeballers as actors, and sort of manipulating that. The little scene where she's asking where he comes from, for example, is a really good example of that, of him sort of being dismissive. And, my cutting style, I think, trying to kind of avoid cutting too much, just trying not to get in the way of those things and just to let things hold for a little longer than usual.
Yeah, it feels very uncomfortable. Like, for instance, when she's talking to the DOD, you really have these very awkward pauses. And because you stretch that out, it makes it feel like she's in a very frustrated place because she's trying to figure out, what do you want me for?
Yeah.
And if it was cut too fast, you wouldn't feel that.
Well, actually, it was, pace isn't about, one thing or another, is it? It's a multiplicity of tempos. And, we definitely took a choice. We could easily have cut to pictures on the desk or, the board with their names and bits of string attached. That was the choice was to say, no, let's deluge her and, make it almost too much to catch up on. Somebody throwing all these names at you, and it makes her look even more vulnerable.
Well, very early on, you do something that I thought was really interesting, which is we're hearing the newscast, and it's sort of in our face, and then suddenly you cut to the newscast behind glass, and you don't hear it, but you see Kate and her partner right there, and it immediately separates them from the rest of the crew.
It's making use of the predictable nature of the end of the sentence to cut wide and to be in a kind of closed space, and you hear the air conditioning, and, she's in a bubble and she's separated, she's conscious of the discussion that's about her going on behind the glass.
You're right. I was like, why is this cut so extreme? And I think it was because you were trying to get information out of what the newscaster was saying, and you cut right before we get the information that we wanted to get.
Yeah, that's it. Also, it's like it's a rhythm thing. I mean, the edit, I was just trying to be it's very much based on rhythm, not so much on continuity. It's based on the cut falling very hard and sharp on a particular beat or anti-beat or whatever, upbeat or something. All of those things are kind of, that's what drives the cutting is... people cut in different ways, and everybody has their own style. And there isn't one bit of shtick that you can use for every film in your career. But it does seem to work for me to kind of like base things on a kind of very hard rhythm. Whereas other people will cut in the middle of a movement, or they'll use some kind of like body movement to hide a cut. I'm much more about trying to make that cut very hard and visible and sharp, but just not to do it too often, just not to cut too often. And then when it does fall, it falls like a sort of Damascus,
Well, another example of that was after the explosion at the house. It feels very surreal and almost dreamlike with the buzzing of the ears and everything. And then there's this hard cut to the shower and the water coming down, and you see the blood dripping down Kate's face. And it was...
very deliberately aggressive cut. And, the really good thing about those surprises and shocks is that when you hold a shot for a long time afterwards, then there's a tension involved because that in this film, things can come at you really fast. So when the soldiers are going down the hill and it's a long-held shot, I think there's an incredible tension to that, because things can jump at you. There's another shock cut, if you like, which is, when she and the John Bernthal, the kind of cowboy bar scene, and you sort of, cut he lifts her in the middle of a dance, and then you carry on with him lifting her, but in a completely different setting, her flat, and they continue the movement. It was just a little accident, I think, or, it's just a thing I could grab hold of, but that very sudden drop of of music. And of course, you spend forever finding the right place for the music to to cut out, you know.
And that fight, it felt very real, I think, because it was a little bit sloppy. You know, it wasn't...
It's messy. It's messy.
It's messy.
Yeah.
Which was great. I noticed, like, in 12 Years a Slave and this film, the music plays a huge role. It's like a character.
Yeah.
And in this, it felt so unnerving.
One of the first conversations I had with Denny in interview, in fact, it was very unusual, and we talked about the script, obviously, but one of the things we talked about was he'd loved the use of music in 12 Years a Slave, and we were talking about that, and he was going to work again with Johan Johansson. But we were talking about the fact that we were going to try something different, which was to cut without temp tracks. So, you know, the typical thing is people come along, they've got a clutch of fairly, you know, well-worn favourites that will work on, you know, then they don't have too much personality so that you could use them to sort of keep the pace and keep the kind of build to certain points. And, you know, it's part of an editing process to do that. And we made a little pact, which was to say, let's try and cut without any guide tracks at all.
Sure.
And give Johan Johansson a completely, you know, a tabula rasa, complete clean slate for him to kind of invent what he wants. And, you know, that's quite tough to do with action sequences, you know, and in fact
It's hard to judge them.
It's very hard to judge them, but it's a really good technique. And in fact, a lot of the film I cut mute. So, I mean, for my background, that's like having an arm behind your back. But what happened is you end up making it very lean and muscular as an edit, because everything, you know, it's the ultimate workout, the ultimate sort of liposuction, because everything has to earn its place. And you know, with the sound down, that it's the cut, it's the story, it's the pacing, it's the content, the sequences working without, you know, the crutch of music. And when it's in that state and you open it out to the composer, you know, I think that's the only way to truly guarantee that you're going to get an original piece of music. I mean, if I sent him something stuffed full of John Williams, I'm going to get that back. You know, one of the things about being, you know, having been very ruthless and very sort of muscular and rhythmic about the kind of cutting is that it allows you those little moments, you know, the little, inessential moments, if you like. And to me, that's a lot of the strength of the film is in those tiny things. You know, the motes of dust seen against sunlight, or the way that Benicio folds his jacket before going into combat.
When they're leaving Juarez, there's this very intense, almost cat and mouse type thing where they're going through these labyrinths of streets, and then you see other cars on other streets and motorcycles. Most of the choices seem like they're either these car mounts where you're in the vehicles with them, or these extreme wide shots.
Yeah. You know, for example, they're coming down a hill and then she's looking around her and you cut wide to 2 helicopter shots of the hillside in Juarez. And you look at it and you just go, well, there's nowhere to hide in this place. And there is a threat all around, you know, as far as these characters are concerned. So, yeah, it was the extremes cutting against each other. There's
this one shot that I thought was really interesting where it's this wide shot and it's sort of messy and then it sort of rack focuses. It's almost like a target. Like you're not sure, is that the military or is that somebody taking aim at these guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good response. That's exactly the response I want.
And is that
it was just a helicopter shot of a road, and then we put in CGI the convoy. I think that's the one we're talking about.
I think so.
And there's like we did a shove in Avid, and then painted in the CGI.
And then it's like you take the rubber band that's already been stretched really far, and you stretch it even further once they get to the border and they can't get across.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this is Denny and Rogers' kind of way of looking at, you know, they are expert sequence builders. My job really was to kind of sometimes to subvert their plan, but mostly just to, you know, make that perfect. And they would give you shots like, once everybody's set up, there was a shot that tracked from the back of the Tahoe to another car with a dog barking in the background, you know, which is the perfect sort of way, once everything's set up, to ratchet up the tension.
Well, again, it's Kate's POV, like her point of view, like looking around, what's going to happen, what's going to happen.
Wait.
Get out of the car.
Complicate.
Señor, tus manos.
Don't move. Complicate. No,
No. Compas. Suelte la pistola. Tírela. Pregunta, paisanos. ¿Quieren morir?
Yeah, and it's, things are slow and then they're suddenly very fast, It's
Well, that's what I thought was terrific about that sequence, was that you really stretched it out, and then when the battle happens or the shootout,
Yeah.
it's done like that.
There's one shot which is, point of view from somebody in the back of the car, and it's just a spray of bullets, and the guy's letting off his weapon in the back seat, and it's going through the bodies, and there's blood sprayed. But we're talking about frames. I mean, but it's red, so it's loud, so it just, you wince when you see it.
Sure.
It knocks your head back.
So then, after this intense sequence, we have the scene where Kate's confronting Graver.
Yeah.
And it's in this very wide shot. And instead of going into close-ups,
Yeah.
you guys decided to play that all in the wide.
All of those things are achieved by pacing, by the fact that, we race out of Juarez and then, boom, we stay still for a while. Mm-hmm. And then actually, even later, when she's on the scene on the rooftop, and you can let it, I let that out a little bit. She walks across and there's nothing going on. She's just walking across a roof. It's not, story.
Of course, the sky is phenomenal.
It's sublime. And it just felt important to kind of, ease off before the next thing starts. Mm-hmm.
The skies have this just power because they're just so beautiful. It's almost like nature goes on while man keeps doing these horrible things.
Yeah, I mean, that's
choice.
Another 12 years thing, is that Louisiana thing, or it was this horror set in this very beautiful countryside.
I thought it was really interesting how we transitioned out of the interrogation scene going down into the drain. And, we don't have to see the waterboarding to understand that that's what's going to probably take place. Was that how the scene was designed?
No, there was more that we cut out. And there was more, but it just felt that was the right time to go. Everybody can imagine, and what you can imagine is probably worse than what we can show.
It was really effective.
And there was some good sound work there. Alan Murray's team, they did this kind of woof, 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 over the cut. And there's quite a lot of hidden sound design going on.
I really enjoyed that sort of transition into the monitor sequence where they're looking at the monitor of the bank.
Yes.
And you're not sure what's going on at first. You have these still frames that are sort of jumping of one of the characters, and then we go into black and white still frames, and then we start going over these things that look like split screens, and you're like, what's going on? What's going on? And then we finally reveal that they're looking at a 4 split screen monitor.
It's halfway through the film, we don't know who the main antagonist, what he looks like. So it's kind of very important to do that. And then with the surveillance things, that was this thing of, there's a beautiful little optical illusion that what we're doing is actually sort of tracking, and we're seeing somebody tracking, then they disappear and you think they're going past a wall or something. But in fact, what they're doing is they're just walking off camera, and we're panning. So that we're panning onto another
panel.
Another panel. And you see the little join.
But what's wonderful is you could have started on them looking at the monitor,
then
gone to it, and instead you chose to sort of keep the audience, keep ahead of the audience.
That's, one of the great joys of editing, is it not? Is that, is trying to anticipate when to tease the audience, not give them enough information, and when to give them the right amount. It's the timing of that information release.
There's all these aerials throughout the whole film, and it's a theme that continues again and again. It's almost like this godlike view.
You know, just when we've met Alejandro, there's a moment where the plane takes off and we sort of have a point of view. That's quite an interesting one. I mean, that was, you know, it's quite early in the film and there's pressure in the story always to kind of get a wiggle on, you know, at the beginning and the end of films. People always want to get a wiggle on, you know, and those are the times where I kind of always buck against that and try and kind of, you know, put something counter to that that's interesting, because I think you're at your most alert, you know. And in the case of that one, it felt like the landscape, what we were very deliberately trying to do was use the landscape as a substitute for what's going on in Alejandro's mind. It's almost like a Rorschach test. You see faces in the landscape, and there's, you know, they're not pleasant faces. It's screaming and it's, you know, mouths and teeth and sharp, and you know, it's nightmarish. And in the sound, I took a sound effect of somebody, it was meant to be a woman being tortured. And I took a little program that I use called Metasynth, which slows it down 10 times. And it's just this, it becomes this squealing noise that sounds a bit like the noise you sometimes hear in a jet. You know, it's at just the right level. And if you listen to it, it kind of it plays all the way through, and you think it's just the engines, you know, some wind in the engines or something, and then it kind of culminates in a scream that wakes him up.
Are you okay?
Yeah. I'm fine.
In the night vision sequence, we, you know, invented a third element, which was that drone footage feel, which was a sort of discovery in post. You know, we felt we lost the geography a little bit of them approaching the tunnel, and it would be cool to have that kind of modern warfare drone vantage point. So we, you know, adapted some helicopter footage of the desert.
The interesting thing about that is we're intercutting infrared. It seemed like almost a heat sensor type camera angle.
Yeah.
And then we have the drone, and we're intercutting these three elements, and it's very disorienting in a good way.
Yeah.
You feel like you're part of that mission.
Yes, and there was also important to kind of like mark each of those changes with a very hard cut and sound. And, you know, despite cutting things mute, sound is a huge part of what I think I do.
Sure.
And I remembered, you know, there's a scene in Alien, in the original Ridley Scott Alien, that always made a mark in my mind, which was when they on the planet and there's bad communications. They can't hear each other. They can't see each other. And there's this huge tension that comes from that, of things, you know, in the dark. And in that scene in particular, you know, I love that we took advantage of all those, the imperfections of walkie-talkies, the little grungy moments that you find. And also we found some sort of harmonic singing in one of the lav mic tracks where it wasn't connecting to the microphone. We just, you know, we used to call that the guitar solo. There was this like high whiny sort of tune. And it was just to constantly have this sense of, you know, you're picking up conversations from all around and that there's an overview.
Plus it's so dark in some of those scenes that you're sort of grasping like for anything, any kind of information to help you, guide you. And I think that with sound and these different elements, you feel very uneasy in that point of view.
Yeah, and that, you know, the thermal camera was something I'd not seen before. I mean, that's an amazing, the thermal camera is a genuine thermal camera they used.
I had heard that Deakins actually shot through real infrared and heat, whereas that hadn't really been done that much before. Because maybe it's not easy to see through those things.
Well, you know, his choice in that whole scene is to say, you know, there'd be a Hollywood way of doing those scenes where, in fact, you know, you've got a giant light source, and then you're going, well, it's no longer a night sequence. Sure. And this is a scene about not being able to see at all. They really were treading around in a desert, unable to see where they were going except through, you know, night vision goggles. And that, you know, he shot it for real.
Sure. Getting back to the sound design, I thought when they're in the caves, one of the things that was very powerful is you hear most of the violence rather than seeing it. What's your involvement with sound at that point?
Well, you know, I put a huge amount of work into the sound. It has a definite pattern, and there comes a point where you really want somebody to come and match that and improve it and take it up a level. And those guys, you know, that's exactly what you'd hope for, is that they come in and, you know, I had this idea with the night vision that things would cut very hard, and I used some sounds from NASA, and I used some things in the cutting copy, you know, recorded walkie-talkies with my assistant, and, you know, all that to try and kind of give a map in the cutting copy of what I think is going to work, you know, the hard cuts, and some things you keep. But then they came along with all these amazing sounds, you know, all the drone shot sounds that they came with. I have no idea where they got them from, but they're really, you know, they're way better.
The performances are so layered and so complex. People who you think, like Graver, you think that he's sort of this one kind of guy because he's sort of happy-go-lucky, but then he can be so brutally cold. And it's so many of the characters in this have those layers.
Yeah, and there was some really lovely stuff, even in the opening scene with Josh, where there's a moment where he suddenly turns the interview around and he says, you know, you married? And then she's a bit taken aback, and then he says, kids. And I always love that moment. His eyes go very cold when he says that. She goes, no, anything else? You know, I don't know, there's cutting actors and, you know, what they do with their eyes, and the timing is, I don't know, that's just my favorite dance of all. You know, you get to dance with the actors a little bit as an editor. And, you know, you're physically involved in what they do. You know, if there's a fight sequence, you know, your arms ache at the end of it, at the end of a day. So you're in there sort of in some way, invisibly. And I don't know, I really love that.
When Benicio is wanting Kate to sign the papers is just so powerful. And when he brings the gun up under her chin, somebody had told me that was almost more the last takes. Like, he didn't always put the gun to her chin. Is that the case?
There was one, Emily asked for another take, and it all sort of, you know, a lot of it just, they nailed it, and I can't remember, I think it was, on her angle, it was like take 4, and all the takes were great, but 4 was the one where there was just this extra level. And it's so complicated what he's doing. It's so messed up in his head. You know, he's taking a tear from her, you know, he's sort of wiping a tear away at the same time as sticking a gun in her throat and tightening the gun as, you know, he's pushing her to sign. I mean, it's very messed up in his head. And I think they just nailed it in that last take.
Yeah, you definitely feel like it is like he's taken on this fatherly role. And it's like, I'm going to have to do this, but I don't want to. You are now part of me. And it's just, there's something so sadistic and special about that particular
They were saying editing,
scene.
the hardest scenes to cut are not the kind of huge set pieces, but the ones where you have 2 people talking. And I think they're often, when I look at other films, the scenes that sometimes I see the strength of an editor is in the way that they cope with just 2 people talking to each other, and how delicately it's done, and how much, you know, you show being spoken and how much you show being heard, and that balance, when it's right, I think is, you know, it's delicious.
Well, I think that some of the hardest scenes to edit are the ones where there's no dialogue, because you're like, how long can I play out these moments? And like on the balcony, how long can you stretch it and still involve the audience, you know? And
yeah, and you're going against the flow, because, you know, people at the end of a film want things to wrap up, and you know that we've all felt at the end of a 95 minutes so far, that we're expecting that final scene, you know. There's a dictate. We've seen thousands of films, all of us, so we know that there's a kind of pattern, and, you know, to go against the grain and slow down at a time like that is kind of crazy, but I don't know, I really like it.
Yeah.
You know.
It makes you think about the film more afterwards.
Yeah.
It sort of stays with you more than if it wraps up quickly. It's sort of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
The world's kind of safe. And sort of stretching out those moments makes it not so safe.
We had a contingency. We had a different ending, actually. They shot a different scene.
Wow.
So,
Is that going to be on the DVD? Or?
Never.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the film. It was it was just brilliant. And
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn.
You saw things you shouldn't have seen.